Okay, welcome to the AI in Education podcast. You know, this week is the upgraded podcast. Dan, bless him, has taken a trip to the United States of America. I wonder if they let him in. Anyway, Dan is over in the Pacific Northwest, which means this week you get an upgrade because it's the news and research episode. And instead of Dan and Dan's dad jokes, we've got Lee Barrett with us. Hello, Lee.
Hello, thank you so much for having me. I think
Oh,
you just
my.
wanted someone with an equally silly accent, didn't you?
You don't approach Dan's accent by any stretch of the imagination. But hey, so you say that. Whereabouts in the UK are you from?
I'm originally from Derbyshire, right in the middle. So it's actually only about 70 k's from the beach. But, it seemed a world away growing up there. And now, of course, I live by the beach. So definitely
Yeah.
upgraded.
My memory of Derbyshire is as a kid going to the Peak District camping and also knowing that the bit of the UK that's furthest from the coastline is kind
Yeah,
of Derbyshire, isn't it?
yeah.
Oh, okay, but you now live in Australia. You live
Mhm,
in New South Wales,
mhm.
not far from me. I love that you've agreed to come on here because you listen to the podcast. We've had you on the guest as a podcast, but what I think more than anything, I always love it when we get a perspective from a teacher or an ex-teacher. And you spend all of your time with teachers these days talking about AI. So maybe just for the benefit of everyone that didn't hear the episode with you, which was about 15 months ago, just tell us a bit about your background, Lee.
Yeah, so I was destined to be a career teacher. I never imagined transferring out of the classroom, the chalk face. I started as a history teacher actually, and then moved into being an English teacher. I just love literacy, and I think that skill set made it so much easier for me to work in the LLM space and the AI space. But my story of how I got to where I am now is largely down to incredible leadership. And I speak about that quite often. But someone seeing something in me and seeing a gap, in our sector and sort
Yep.
of giving me the opportunity to have a deep dive into generative AI when it first came into our worlds as novices in November 2022. I taught at a boys' school. I was doing some work with some low literacy boys and posted that on LinkedIn. And, the rest, as they say, is history. I started to get some people following the work I was doing. And then CEnet tapped me on the shoulder and asked me if I'd like to head up the CE Chat project as the pedagogy expert alongside. If you know me, then you'll absolutely know my amazing co-worker, Prem Radhakrishnan, who ordinarily I don't do anything without him, but he's been on leave for a month. But he and
I,
I head up the CE Chat project.
when,
And yeah,
Whenever I hear your name or Prem's name, I immediately in my head do the hashtag out and about with Lee and Prem.
exactly.
Okay, well, um, Lee, this is a news and research episode. So the way that Dan and I normally do this is we've found the interesting news and the interesting research on AI in education. For some reason, Dan lets me do all the work. So I go and find those things. I look at it. I have to read it all. I come on and talk about it. And then Dan, bless him, just then adds his opinion on top of that.
And
So
reads the titles. And reads the titles.
that's exactly right, because I've got to get a break. So let's do exactly the same. Oh, just the other thing I should say. We haven't said
Yeah.
this on the podcast for a while. We all make a living in the world of AI and education. And apart from me, everybody works for an organization. Like Dan works for Microsoft, you work with CEnet. But when we're on the podcast, we're talking as individuals rather than giving the perspective of the organization. And I only say that because I don't want some listener to go, oh, well, that's Lee's organizational opinion about something, because you may not have seen all the news stories I've plumped in, and you might say stuff that
Caveat. Yes,
yeah.
caveat. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Let's crack off then. So first of
Okay.
all, we'll start with the news.
Mhm.
The really interesting thing is Chicago Law School. So earlier in the year, Dan and I talked about the agreement that Chicago Law School had, where they'd done an agreement with Harvey AI,
Mm.
both Chicago and Oxford University, so that their law students got a feel and learned how legal AI was used. So Harvey is AI for lawyers. As you use it as a student, effectively you're using the same tools that the lawyers are using. But that was March. Things have changed because Chicago Law School have now said that they're going to ban laptops and phones for their first year students. What they're focusing on now is that first year experience has got to be an intensive, rigorous, forced to learn, not skip learning by using AI. And also, they're doing more in-person exams. So no access to the internet, no access to ChatGPT to help you, and more kind of oral discussions as part of the assessment process. And I thought that's interesting because if you saw the story in March, you'd think they're going all in on AI. Now they're kind of going all out on AI and technology.
Yeah, I saw this, and I think perhaps like many of your listeners, I think we really fall victim to those clickbait titles, don't we? And I think this immediately struck me as one of those. When you see the word ban, you
Yep.
instinctively start to think about, oh, you're making it taboo, you're pushing the students. For me, this was a real media literacy moment because leaders who are reading this, they think about the panic and that pendulum swinging, but the real story is far more measured. It also shows again the passage of time and how quickly we move in this landscape. But the other thing I want to say about this was that it also spoke to me about that measured approach of thinking about where you start. They're not saying we're banning AI, throughout the whole of the course. They're wanting to develop skills, meaningful skills in that first year. And I think that really speaks highly of that organization. I think it's commendable.
Yeah. And you're right. They bring AI back in later on.
Which, if you read the article, you get to that. But if you
Yeah.
didn't, you just
Yes.
in this space of banning AI. And I loathe the clickbait nature of that. But I understand, why
Well,
people do that.
yeah, I used to be a writer for the Times Education Supplement, and I kind of feel like we get the media that we pay for, and none of us pay
True.
for it, so we get the clickbaity stuff. Okay, other thing I saw in the news in the last couple of weeks, Anthropic have announced Claude for teachers. So basically, if you're in North America or in the US and you're a K-12 teacher, you can now sign up for Claude for free. I think this is very similar to what OpenAI did with ChatGPT.
Mhm.
But I think what was really interesting here is that they were kind of linking it through to specific skills within Claude that help you as a teacher, but then linking it through to the state standards and the curricula that comes through Learning Commons. So it isn't just we'll give you AI and it's grounded in your relevant teaching materials in North America at least.
Yeah, I found a couple of things interesting about this. I think,
Mm,
again, it's noteworthy because they have sort of really started to align with our sector. I think that's interesting. The other thing was that endorsement by the American Federation of Teachers, that union backed legitimacy. I think that's really interesting. And it was surrounding the privacy and workforce concerns. I wonder if teachers over there will be able to have some sort of metric on how much time this has saved. I'd be interested to know, like, some follow-up research on that. But I think,
yeah.
as you mentioned, the curriculum grounding is possibly the most interesting thing for us here in Australia because
Mm,
we struggle with that. Certainly with CEchat, we struggle with that with the different jurisdictions, the different syllabus documents. And then when you add in mission or, specific school strategic directions, yeah, you can lose some of that fidelity to curriculum. So this was really interesting to me. I just want to say one more thing. Is that okay? I don't know if Dan does
mm,
this interrupting as much, but I think with Australia, with those different jurisdictions, and particularly within New South Wales, the curriculum reform is making this even more tricky. And I'd be actually really interested to get into the back end and the fine tuning within what they've done at Anthropic to make sure that this is valid. But yeah,
yeah.
call out to anyone who knows exactly how they've achieved this. It's my understanding that they don't have a sort of a nationalized set of standards for curriculum either. So it'd be really interesting to see how they've collected the data, how they've guaranteed that fidelity. I'd be interested to know how they've done that.
Now, talking of clickbait headlines, I saw an article in the conversation where the headline was more than 50% of Australian university assignments used AI.
Indeed.
And this was obviously 100% accurate because as soon as it got into the article, it said the number is 53.6%. So obviously, if they're doing point percentages, it must be 100% accurate. But then I started to read the story. So it's quoting from a Turnitin Learning Integrity Insights report. So Turnitin, we're already kind of thinking about the provenance of it. But of course, be me, I love reading reports. So I went off and read the report to see if it really said that 53.6% of assignments are written by AI. And the answer is the very Australian, yeah, nah. What is good about the report is it looks at the situation across a number of different regions. So UK, US, Australia. But here's the interesting thing. That over half figure represents where they have detected any presence of AI in any text assignment. Now, any could mean in a 10,000 word assignment, it found one sentence and said, oh, that's written by AI. Now, I have no faith in that at all. Normally, Turnitin set their bar as it's got to have at least 20% of AI generative content for us to kind of even just flag it up. And when you take that, the number drops. It's about a third of work that hits that barrier. But interestingly, Australia is lower than the other countries. So lower than the US and the UK.
Interesting.
But that isn't the headline you'd click on. Australia is cheating less with AI than other countries, which is why we got the other headline. It's university data that for schools, it's a slightly different thing. So it looks like in schools, they would claim maybe 6% of assignments are AI written or have a substantial bit of AI in it. The headline removes the drama of the story. I did think twice about whether we should even talk about this because we have said on the podcast 37 times AI detectors don't work. But one of the things it can do is spot patterns, and across 100,000 papers, you can see a pattern that you would not ascribe in an individual one. The reliability of looking at a single paper and saying that is AI written is an issue. But if you're looking at 100,000 papers, you can see the trends. And so I think the trend is telling us, yes, there is AI in assignments, but I don't think it's as dramatic as the headline makes it. And it really talks to the issue about, are we designing assessments that are appropriate for today's world?
Yeah, you took the words out of my mouth. The authors did admit that it measures likelihood of AI presence, not misconduct. And I think when we delve into news like this, we really get caught up in the cheating and, that whole notion that we've got to ping the students, but we don't know if they're formative, summative tasks. We don't know, there's no insight into that. And like you say, it's about the redesign of assessment rather than the policing of it, in my mind.
Yeah, and that's absolutely right. The presence of AI doesn't mean you're being lazy.
No,
I'm going to claim that because I use AI to help me in my writing. I
100%.
do a huge amount of research with it.
Yeah, and I think we have to be clear with the students that vulnerability and transparency, we call for that from the students. We have to honor that with what we say. Of course, I use AI to help me with my profession. I wouldn't be able to achieve what I do without it. But, for the critical stuff, would I use it? No. And we just don't know in this scenario what we're talking about here.
Yeah, I don't use AI to help me switch my brain off. I
No.
use it to do work that I couldn't possibly do at the scale or at the speed that I need to be able to do it at. So I think it's positive. Anyway, hey, freebies, talking about assessment, there's two great freebies we found this week. So the first is a free ebook called Show Your Work, Assessment in the Age of AI. Look, this is a bit like this podcast. We do all this stuff and then we just give it away. Well, the authors of this free book, Kevin Yee, who's a special assistant to the provost of AI at the University of Central Florida. What a great job title.
I know.
And three of his UCF colleagues. And what I love about it is this is not a dry academic book that you plow through and feel that you've just got to get to the end. I'm going to call it an accessible mountain of ideas.
Yeah.
It just throws lots of great ideas for how you might approach assessment in an age where students have access to AI, and some students will use it in assessment to try and subvert the process. And I think you can use it in one or two ways. You could use it as something to read now and then consider for the future, or you could just put it in your pile and drop into it next time you're thinking about designing a formative or a summative assessment, and look for some crazy ideas. And so the ideas it's got break into three areas. One is co-creation, so designing assessments where the students actively use AI. The second bunch of ideas is AI friction. So how do you create AI resilient assignments that where it's difficult to use AI in them? And then the third is learning with AI. It's techniques for adding barriers to make it less possible for the student to use AI to do the work that they should be doing.
Mm.
That seems a convoluted way to say so that the students don't switch their brain off.
Yeah, I flagged it as an excellent lucky dip. I did want to point out a caveat for school leaders. Obviously, I'm talking about Australia, but I know that this would be relevant for the UK as well. It is written for university faculties with a lot of course level autonomy. And obviously, for the school context, you should see it as a source of ideas to adapt against the syllabus requirements. Just always a reminder. It's not a set of assessments to lift, so to speak. So that design, that human design, is really important.
I've just thought of a way that you might use this. Feed the
Okay.
book into your AI and say, I've got this assessment. Are there any ideas in here about how I might update it a little bit? I mean,
With your own outcomes that you're planning
yeah,
to set. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah,
yeah. No,
listeners should
and
have a good look at that. It felt to me like it was a real altruistic act of generosity, and there was some substance. I liked it.
yeah, and I'm going to talk with Kevin, and we'll get him on the podcast at some point in the future.
Oh, brilliant.
Um, hey, Lee, do you use Notebook LM much?
I have. I do. It's not my go-to, but yeah, I have. I know you love it.
I do because I use it in my professional life and I use it for bringing lots of information together, but I won't be using it anymore
Hmm.
because there's the clickbait headline. I will
It is,
never
isn't
use
it?
Notebook LM again. And the reason is they changed the name. So
Mm.
they've changed the name to call it Gemini Notebooks. So yeah, it's clearer now. It's part of the Gemini world. But my question in my head is I've been calling it Notebook LM for 3 years. I'm still calling Twitter Twitter,
I
and that
know.
was
Same.
years ago. So I think I'm still going to be calling it Notebook LM.
Mm. Look, I pointed out here that Google do this a little bit. They have these incubator project names and then they sort of consolidate them under the flagship brand. And it does,
Hmm.
like they did it with Bard, becoming Gemini. And it kind of, for me, I don't know, you're sort of, there's a risk of reputational damage there a little bit. But I mean, they're so big and ubiquitous that I'm sure that we'll get over it.
One year we did a Christmas quiz version of the podcast, and I'm thinking that this year's Christmas quiz could be, can you remember what the product was called before it was called this? Because I'd forgotten that Gemini used to be called Bard.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's a really good quiz. Oh, I'd be miserable at that because I forget very easily. But
Well, for those listeners in the UK, they're currently in the middle of renaming Hysteria because Count Binface, who's standing in a local election, two of the things on his campaign trail are renaming Skittles back to Opal Fruits. Only English people would
oh,
understand that.
yum! I love
And
open fruits.
and Snickers renaming Snickers back. Do you remember what they were called?
Was it called a marathon?
It was.
Yeah, I remember the
Yeah.
marathon. Yeah.
Okay. Gosh, that's and so suddenly we've turned into a trivia quiz on the podcast. Okay. Hey, another freebie.
Yes.
So this is from Professor Miriam Tanti and a bunch of others at La Trobe University's AI Institute. And it's a brilliant, free resource written specifically for secondary teachers. So this is better than the last one. If you're a teacher in a high school, this is the thing to look at first. So it's called The Science of Learning and Generative AI, a practical guide for secondary teachers. And the reason they're focusing on secondary schools is many of the AIs have limits that you can't use them if you're under 13. And it's very practical. They have basically grounded everything they're writing about in learning science, cognitive science, educational psychology, and neuroscience. So all of the good theory, but then they look at it on 4 areas where you might use Gen AI and where it intersects with Gen AI and the world of learning. So attention and cognitive load, which we've talked about, memory and knowledge, transfer and problem solving, and metacognition and self-regulation. So it's kind of broken down into the 4 of those areas, and it is the antidote to what I see on LinkedIn and Twitter all the time, which is a breathless social media influencer going, oh, here's the brilliant prompt. All you need to do if a teacher is use this prompt. And it, instead of taking the AI is good or bad approach, which I'm seeing more and more actually in the media, they kind of look at it and say, well, The really important question is AI increasing or reducing mental effort that leads to learning? Because learning is supposed to be hard. There are three big ideas. The first is the educational value of AI depends on how it's used. So it's not about the technology, it's about how you use it. The second is learning happens through thinking, not information access. And I, I don't learn through LinkedIn Learning anymore because I don't think I think. I just watch a video and click next. So I now choose learning platforms that force me to think. The third idea is good teaching manages cognitive load. And know that you're trying to look for the zone of proximal learning, aren't you? The what's just out of reach.
Yeah.
And then the kind of last idea is students need to be taught how to use AI well, which I absolutely 100% agree with.
Yeah.
Um,
Firstly, I want to talk about that
mm,
binary argument that you've pulled out, that AI is either good or bad. I think it's becoming really tiresome, and
mm,
I call all of your audience to challenge that. I don't think that's a fair representation of the work that we have to do in our sector. It's never going to be that easy, and if someone's telling you it is, there's usually an incentive, I find. And the other thing, I have a lot to say about this paper. I've already used it an incredible number of times. I'm planning presentations for the next sort of 8 weeks. And the reason I love this is you've got the credibility of La Trobe. That's brilliant. So for us, there's a vindication there. And I think it addresses the skepticism that you can find in the staff room around AI. But I also think it really spoke to me about agency. And I speak a lot about epistemic agency, but it seemed to me that it revalues the teacher. And I think if you're going to take any of this research, there's a lot of convergence in the research at the moment, which I think it's exciting. We're starting to find similar patterns, but this is about the value that the teacher has and the professionalism of the teacher to know when and where to use the AI, and to understand the messy weeds of productive struggle, and just to lean into what you're trained to do. I think it's not saying how much AI you should use, it's not telling you what AI to use, it's reminding you of your core profession, your business as usual, which I think is brilliant. I love this paper.
mm.
It made me think of Dr. Sarah Ratner. She is the incredible woman who leads the AIEOU out of University of Oxford. And she was just recently over in Western Australia with the Fogarty Institute. And she spoke about, I hope I'm saying this correctly, she'll correct me if I'm wrong, but this paper reminded me of that notion of research to policy to practice. And I felt
Yep.
like this was, really evidential of that.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. I was hearing some discussion over the last 2 weeks with researchers saying, but the point of education research is not to turn it into practice. It is theoretical research. And I couldn't disagree more. Because what is the point of doing research that doesn't make it into the classroom? And
Yeah,
so I'm
silly.
really keen that of all the research that we've looked at in on AI in education, to pull out the messages, even if it's theoretical research that you can't then go and ground immediately in the classroom, there's still indicative stuff there that helps you get to that point where understanding where AI is going to be valuable for learning and where it is not going to be valuable for learning. That stuff is really, really important. And for me, that message of, well, AI is bad or AI is good. ChatGPT with a student trying to complete their homework is bad unless you simply say, be Socratic and don't give them the answer, and suddenly it's good. I mean, it's a small line between taking a positive or a negative direction.
Agreed.
Okay, right. So that's all the news. There have been research papers.
Mm.
Now, Lee, I'm going to rely on you to do what Dan always does, which is he always gets the job of reading out the sometimes gruesomely long titles of the research papers, and I'll tell you what I found in them.
I'd be honoured. He'll be really sad that he's not here this week because this was ridiculously small. Generative AI can harm teaching. There
Oh,
we
well,
go.
there we go. That links straight into that conversation. This is a true randomized controlled trial, which is kind of good because it's going to give us more repeatable and less influenceable results. It was done in real classrooms. So the issue we found is, of course, AI can undermine learning. So students whose teachers were given access to an AI teaching assistant felt less motivated to learn. Okay, so the teacher has access to the AI. It's as an assistant that helps them create courses and things like that. And they found it has a knock on effect onto students. So this is researchers at the University of Pennsylvania, including Angela Duckworth, who's an educational psychologist who I've come across a few times. They looked at 193 teachers with 2,800 middle and high school students in a school chain in Turkey. And so what they did was the random bit was teachers were randomly assigned to either have access to ChatGPT Learning Assistant, which, a bit like the earlier conversation, we've customized to their national curriculum, or to continue teaching as normal. So teachers were split into two groups, and over 10 weeks, they could use AI to help them to generate lecture notes, assignments, exams, etc. Here's the really interesting thing. The students whose teachers had access to the AI tool rated their classes as less enjoyable, less interesting, and less important than the students who had teachers where no change was made. It's the first time I think I've seen this. I've seen plenty of bits of research that say teachers love it when they've got AI to help them do lesson planning, but this is measuring the impact on students. Now, academic achievement didn't change pretty much.
No.
But
experience did.
Experience did. Yeah. I think it's really fascinating. Sungu, who wrote the paper, said it would be a mistake to conclude that AI is terrible and will ruin education.
Yeah, I noted that.
What he says is access to AI technology alone does not improve teaching. I'm guessing that that's kind of sings to the heart of one of your beliefs, Lee.
Yeah, and I mean, I think we get quite honest and vulnerable with CEchat in that we say this quite often. Provisioning does not mean use. It like if you can provision a tool to a school, but it does not mean that there's going to be purposeful use. And I think this is what this spoke to for me. It also goes back to the vocation of teaching. Why do you become a teacher? You're typically someone who's very relational, and we know that the measure of your relationship with your students has a direct impact on, their outcomes. So the title does a lot. It draws you in, but I didn't disagree with anything here. I thought that it spoke to the work that we're trying to do around change culture and the fact that you've got to develop teachers with this new skill set, and you've got to prepare students for what might change from their previous experience without AI, particularly if they've had no AI in primary schools and then they get to high school and all of a sudden they're exposed to it. So yeah, it was an interesting one for me. Do you know something I want to speak about as well? Firstly, by the way, this wasn't peer reviewed, so just a caveat for our real research nerds out there. But fascinating thing for me is we're working with ACU for some of our research, but I've found that Turkey is one of those places where they have very different ethics proposal rules. So you can actually do some really interesting research. There are a couple of countries around the world, but I found this out when I was at Oxford last year. And it seems to me that this is a hotbed of innovation for research. I don't know if you've noticed how many papers come out of Turkey or the research pool is within Turkey, but it's fascinating. Yeah, what do you think about that?
Yeah, no, I agree. So the reason we often talk about research that hasn't yet been peer reviewed is that peer review process can take over a year. And my problem with that is that AI technology is moving so fast that if you have to wait a year before you can publish a paper, it's going to be out of date. You're going to be testing an AI.
There'll be a name change of something by then.
but probably the AI model you're testing it with won't be available in a year's time when it comes out. So we always go for talking about research that is published open access and is still time relevant. The second reason we talk about open access papers on the podcast is that we put the links in the show notes because we're not telling you the answer. We're saying this might be worth reading. And the link in the show notes takes you to the paper, and you do not need to be an education researcher to get access to the paper. I think maybe in the last 3 years, we've talked about 3 papers that are behind firewalls that you have to pay €50 to unlock. But most of the time, we're talking about papers that are free, and use your own judgment. Okay, the next one's got a longer title.
Yeah, okay, I'm ready. All right. Artificial intelligence and feedback in university education, effectiveness and student perceptions.
Okay, so this is really interesting. Researchers from two Italian universities, what they did was they got two different AI models, GPT-04 Mini and a DeepSeek R1. So what they did was they used it to generate feedback with students. So 238 students in a project-based education course. And students then took the feedback and revised their projects. And then they measured the improvement that had been made in the work due to the feedback. Some students got feedback from ChatGPT, some got some feedback from DeepSeek, and some got feedback from teachers. What they found was all three groups, their work improved by a similar amount, and they didn't see a difference in learning outcomes. The ChatGPT model actually, they said, gave them results that were statistically equivalent to teacher feedback. I think it's really interesting. The students, not knowing where the feedback came from, rated the feedback as roughly similar between whether it's AI generated or teacher generated. And that's interesting because I've heard so many times like, oh, I know when AI has written something. Well, the students are not able to spot that. It is another contribution to the discussion about whether AI should be generating feedback for students and in which circumstances it's right to do it. But from an educational outcomes perspective, what they're saying here is it gives feedback that students rate as highly as feedback from a teacher. And statistically, it's pretty close to what a teacher would produce for a student.
Yeah, I love this. Actually didn't read the paper here, but what this says to me is that there was intention in the way that this feedback process was designed. So you've still got that human in the loop, but you've got the human designing the feedback using AI in such a meaningful way that there's no discernible difference to the student. And I think the key thing here is this to me seems intentional in that you're not giving feedback on that summative piece. It's for the development and growth. I like that. I like that use of AI in this process.
Yeah.
Love it.
Okay. So, yeah, next paper is also about assessment.
Indeed. Grading in an age of assessment reform, the elephant in the room.
So, Lee, do you know about the Cradle team at Deakin? I'm going to call them the Cradle Mafia.
Yeah, I know, Thomas. Yeah.
Right. So they are some of the podcast's favourite assessment researchers. Mafia is so unfair because they do such a great job. So people like Phil Dawson, Margaret Bierman, Thomas Corbin, David Boyd, and a bunch of others. And this is a research article that uses plain English in the title. So I'm sure it should be twice as long. But when they say the elephant in the room, we all know what they're talking about.
We do.
And they kind of look at the current state and the road ahead for what happens in assessment, especially in a world where pretty soon every student is going to have a PhD level buddy sitting alongside them that is going to have no inhibitions about, let's call it shortcutting learning or cheating, helping them to cheat. It's like having the answers at the back of the book. Students can flip straight to the answer at the back of the book. And so we know what happens. Basically, their argument is that grading is the elephant in the room because although universities are changing assignments, exam rules, and policies, they are not changing final grades. Yeah. And they're kind of saying AI-proof grading tries to stop students using AI, but is grading the right answer? Is it, for example, sophisticated enough to be able to give an impression of what a student really masters, or is it just a number at the end? I see this as an employer when people come to me because they think they can express something as a grade. Like in the UK, I got a first in my degree. It's like, yeah, great, but I need to know how you apply that. Mm. Yeah, it's a good discussion to have about what do we do about grading.
Yeah, I think this speaks to the work of Pasi Solberg and what's the purpose of education and by which metrics do we measure young people and students. It's part of a much broader discussion point, but I always value the straight shooting of this group, and I think this has real worth and merit.
And their argument is universities need to find richer ways to show skills,
Hmm.
including what students can do both with and without AI, because as they start to approach graduation and then employment, that's the kind of evidence that they need. And at the moment, they're doing it subjectively based on their own ability to talk about that.
Yeah. No, interesting. Are you ready for the next one, Ray?
Take a deep breath for this one, Lee. It's a longer title.
It's all right, I've got this. They've all got colons at the moment. Are you noticing that as well? Interactive learning dashboards, rethinking learning visualizations as engagement tools.
Yes. Okay. So this is about learning analytics. And learning analytics has been a thing for a while, hasn't it? I nearly didn't include it because it's just another dashboard in many cases. But if you're into learning analytics, then this is a good paper for you. The reason I talk about it is even though it's only a small test, just 30 students, what they found is if AI asked students about how they were progressing and then got them to reflect before it told them the answer, then students had a better understanding of where they were. So, learning analytic dashboards, you go to the dashboard, you find out your result, fine. This is a reflective piece before you go and see the answer of how do you think you're doing? I mean, we know how humans do this. When you sit down with your annual review with the boss, and the first question they ask is, "What do you think you've done this year?" And see, your heart sinks, and you have to do that really honest assessment rather than just being told. And so going through that process means that students are more engaged with learning. And
Yeah, I mean, we do this in normal assessments. Like this is a common assessment design process.
mm,
I don't recall in the past, I don't know, let's say last decade, where we didn't get students to do a reflection before they got the grade. So they'd complete the paper and then you'd
yeah,
make them do that. And to be honest, we would then mark the reflection because therein lies some of the real that productive struggle. You can see where they admit that they struggle. But I think your point about this paper is going to be about the dashboard of data, right? And that
yeah,
how useful
yeah.
is that?
I'll give you an example. I used to be responsible for a marketing dashboard of data many years ago, and we sent out a report every week by email. And I became convinced that nobody read it. They just received the dashboard. So I instructed my team to stop sending the report. And it was 6 months before anybody came back and said, "Oh, I don't seem to get that report anymore." So I think I was right. And
Yeah.
I think kind of the learning analytics world suffers from that a little bit, which is, oh, it's a dashboard, click past it, go into the next thing.
Yeah.
And so if you're going to apply AI to a dashboard, which is, oh, well, the AI will tell you what you should look at here, the lesson from this is don't do that without causing people to think first. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
where do you think things are? Do you think it's gone up or down this week? Is a much more engaging way of getting people engaged with the data and making them use it than just giving it to them in a different format.
Yeah, we do some work on that in CEnet, and I think the incentive that we put in there is that the teachers or the end users have to select based on what they want to find out. It's not just automatically provided. I think that's the point, right? What are you actually wanting from this data so that there's an intent, you know where you're going.
Yeah. Okay, Lee. I feel like the titles are getting longer. So
They
this is the
are.
last. This is the last paper, but it's got the longest title.
Okay, are you ready? It's got some lovely words in here as well. Illuminating complex student realities of artificial intelligence through an entangled pedagogy framework.
I wonder what that means in English.
I love the use of the word entangled. Go
Oh,
on.
this is Tim.
You've done the
This is
research on it.
Tim. Yeah, this is Tim Fawn. I run into Tim all the time at various conferences and events. He's down at Monash University. These researchers are from four universities in Australia, and they have been running a project over the last few years called the Australian AI in HE project. And what they've been doing is they started with a massive survey of 8,000 students, and then they've been digging deeper and deeper into the data that constantly engaging with students tells them. Also, bonus points for Tim for sending this to me. You'd be
Got it.
surprised at how few researchers send me the research and say this might be relevant for the podcast. I think maybe three in the last 3 years.
Well,
But basically, what this does is it gets to the point of going, You can't just do an AI policy and assume that's going to change anything. So stricter controls, clearer policies, more guidance is not going to solve the challenge of AI and assessment. They did a focus group with 80 students across the 4 different universities. And then for this paper, they then dug down into 3 specific students. Now, just to be clear, this isn't 3 theoretical profiles of 3 types of students. This is 3 specific students. So they just went deeper and deeper and deeper to understand how people are using AI and how they're relating to it. So one is a postgrad maths education student who's a father, so balancing homework and academic. One is a art history undergrad with ADHD, and the third is a psychology student also working in retail. Now, the reason I think this is really good that they did this is this isn't fictional characteristics. These are real people that have real lives outside of education. And so what they did was understand how they want to use AI. So in there were the refuseniks. The postgrad math student was also a father. So they could see AI from the perspective of themselves as a student, but they could also see it from the perspective of their own children and seeing what it was doing for them. One of the students, absolute total reject of AI, a complete moral stance against AI. I'm coming across that more and more in conversations, I think.
Same.
One trusted AI enormously, used it all the time, but was quite strategic with it. So it's really interesting to kind of see those profiles and realize that students are not a homogenous bunch. And we've said, I think, in the last 2 years, so much research is coming out saying students are confused about how they can and can't use AI in their work at education. But this gets deeper into what are the motivations for doing it? And if we cleared up the rules, would it make life better? And it pretty much says that it is just one part of the equation because there's so many other connected factors going on with students.
Did it speak about cultural or ethnic backgrounds? I mean, obviously we've got a father, so we've got presumption of one sex there, but there'd be interesting further research of these micro cases.
Yeah. And their original data set, which I think has been updated, and the new report hasn't yet come out because they're doing the analysis right now, but they have got a data set where they have got more ethnographic and demographic information on the students and an ability to break it down. The real challenge that this team have is they do great research, then they have to get it published. And so even though they've completed the analysis, it's going to then take a year for it to appear because this paper took, I think, a year to get published. So in a year's time, we'll know what's going on right now.
Be a fascinating longitudinal study, wouldn't it? Like that, what's that TV show out of the UK? There's 7 years.
Yeah.
You know, was it 7 years? It was, you followed those school children all the way through. I'd be fascinated just to check back in with them at, annual points. And I think what I started talking to is, how does it change when you're no longer a student and you're in the world of work, or when you become a parent, or when, there's so many fascinating things for me when I think about the work I do in the K-12 space, which really is meant to be about students, but increasingly becomes about society. And I think this kind of work could really, and there you go, this could illuminate, that's why they use that word. It really could illuminate some of the, I don't know, the trends or...
Yeah, and I think one of the points that they make in the paper illustrates that really well because they say that you can't just teach AI literacy. That is not enough to prepare students for real world decisions about using AI, whether that's in the workplace, whether that's in their private lives or other things. It isn't just a question of literacy. I mean, this goes right back to, you said, what did you study at university?
Maritime history.
Oh my word! And then
I was joining the Navy. Yeah, I was not going to be a teacher. No. Yeah, I was
like the perfect combo, I think, of a degree to do is a humanities and a science-based one. The computer science and psychology, history and I don't know, AI or coding or whatever. It's that combination of those two things is what you need for real world use. If you just know the technology, how are you going to deal with the ethics and all of those questions? If you just understand the ethics and all of that stuff without understanding the scale that you can do things with technology, again, you're at a disadvantage. The perfect degree does not yet exist, but it is something that straddles both humanities and sciences.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. And then by extension, the perfect approach to this is kind of like what Prem and I have, where, he has that technical expertise and I have the sort of more philosophical, experiential approach. It's, yeah, fascinating. I think if we could have longitudinal studies in this that could be released far more quickly, I think we would all benefit.
It's been amazing having you in this conversation
Ah,
because we I love the fact that we've gone from theoretical discussions into philosophical discussions, back to theoretical discussions, over to technology. There's so much happening. We would never be able to keep up to date with everything, but hopefully our audience have got an idea of things that they want to go and dig deeper into. And in the show notes, they'll find the links to the papers. Somebody said last week to me, they said that they really valued the fact that we took the time to put the notes and the links to each of the papers and news stories in the show notes. So I'm so glad, because it takes an extra half an hour every week to put that in. But people go and read that stuff, hopefully useful to people. And we'll have to get you back on the podcast soon
oh,
to
thank
come
you.
and tell your story about what you're continuing to do in with CEnet and all the work you're doing with teachers.
Thank you so much. And I agree. The work you do with this podcast is incredible and it's really valuable to us also. Thanks for having me. And I know that you'll be looking forward to getting Dan back from the mothership, but I've really enjoyed this. I really
I
have.
was
Thank you.
I was just about to say, if you're listening, Dan, no need to hurry back.
Thank
Thank you. Bye.
you. Bye.